Hello. Hope everybody's doing well and enjoyed my quick scrambling of trying to get my screen share to move things onto the proper window, because that's what I need, 2 minutes into a demo. So thank you, Caroline. Let's see. Let me go ahead and get going. Everything's all shared. Everything should be good. So yes, as she mentioned, I am Chris Tankersley. I'm the Senior PHP Developer Advocate. What that means to most of you is that not only do I help develop some of the demo applications and stuff that we do, but I actually work on a lot of the SDKs. So if you have any questions about any of the SDKs that we go through today, specifically, we're going to talk about the PHP one, obviously, because we're going to talk about Laravel, but also any of the other languages, or with our Vonage communications APIs or core APIs. I work on all of those as well. So not only is it kind of how we work with them, but also, we're deep in the guts of playing with a lot of these things. So today, obviously, we're going to play with video and Laravel. Over the last year, video has become a very popular method of communication for everybody. And even as the world opens back up, it's still going to be a very prominent part of how we actually talk and interact with our customers. So today, we're going to actually walk through, and by the time we're done, you should have a fully featured application to be able to play with. Most of this, if you are already kind of set up on PHP, you should be able to follow along with. So we'll take a little bit of breaks at some certain points, especially where there's some larger things to type in. And then also feel free to ask any questions as we go along. I have a couple moderators here that are going to be able to help me. They may be able to answer some questions for you if you run into some small technical difficulties, but otherwise I will be watching the chat. And if anything pops up, I can answer them right then and there. We don't have to wait till the end. So without further ado, let me get my notes so that I can actually see what I'm looking at. So a couple of housekeeping things out of the gate. This won't come into play too much right at this moment with this presentation. But as Vonage is a fairly large company and we have a lot of APIs, some of our things are named a little bit different. So depending on which API stack you're working on, you may see things in references to Nexmo, especially if you're using Laravel before. We have things like the Nexmo notification channel and like our Nexmo Laravel package. Wherever you see Nexmo, that's Vonage. Same thing with OpenTalk. That's going to be the platform that we're talking about today. But that is also Vonage. From a company standpoint, they're completely interchangeable. These are not partners that we work with or anything like that. These are actually part of Vonage. As many of you are probably developers and probably know, renaming things can be very hard. So some of our packages are on still some older names, things like that. So you're going to see a lot of OpenTalk today, but that is fully our Vonage platform and everything like that. So if you see any older packages, if you see any packages like that, don't worry about them being older packages or being on an old platform or anything like that. Just their names. Otherwise, everything is all good and up to date. When you signed up with the class, it should have given you like a very short little kind of like list of things to have. Depending on how you want to run this, feel free to just watch and listen along. But if you want to play around with this on your computer, make sure that you have at least PHP 7.4 installed. We're going to be using Laravel 8 today for the demo. At Vonage, all of our PHP packages are supported back to 7.2, but for today's demo, to kind of keep things constrained, make sure that you're at least on PHP 7.4 or PHP 8 will work as well. That just helps cut down on any technical questions we may have. And make sure you have Composer installed as well. If you want to install any extra packages, we're going to use that. NPM is also used, but it's a little bit less needed. But make sure you have that installed as well. And make sure you already have an OpenTalk account already set up. If you've signed up for an account on dashboard.nexmo.com, make sure to also go over to talkbox.com/account, sign up for an account over there. You get some free credit like you do on the Nexmo side. But then all of your management stuff for the APIs and your projects and everything will all be over on that side instead. But with all of that kind of in mind, what exactly are we going to do today? The workshop is scheduled for roughly about 2 hours, and then there'll be some time afterwards for questions and a little bit of talking between everybody. But what exactly are we going to try to accomplish today? Well, I've split things into two sections. One is what I like to call the setup phase. We're going to go over exactly what the video API is, some of the strengths for it, and some of the things you can do with it. And then, like I said, we're going to start completely from scratch today and show you everything from top to bottom, getting this application running. So we're going to set up Laravel. And then we're going to go through and set up Laravel Breeze. I know in the description for this, initially we were saying you're using Jetstream. Kind of at the last minute, I decided to switch this over to Breeze. It was a lot easier for the demo and a lot less boilerplate that we needed to get set up. So we'll walk you through getting that all going. And then we will go through setting up Vonage to actually work with the Laravel system itself. Because there's a couple things you can do to make it much nicer to work with in the ecosystem of Laravel. And then the second half, we'll take a little short 10-minute break. But then after that, we are actually going to go through adding video to an existing application. So we're going to go through creating what we call sessions, how that links up to what we may have in the application, being able to create rooms on the fly, and then being able to actually like set up like multiple rooms, as well as demoing off a couple of other things. So this is not going to be just a real quick, drop an embed on a page and call our day done. By the time this is done, we will have a full stack Laravel application with user authentication, dynamically creating rooms as needed for the users. And you can take that as a small proof of concept and build off of it, or extend that out and add whatever features you need to on top of it. But you'll get a good run through of both the server side and the client side of how all of this works. So the bulk of what we want to talk about today is the Vonage Video API, even though we'll spend some time setting some things up. The core of what we want to build with today is that API. So if you are not super familiar with what the Vonage Video API is, it is a general purpose video API. So what that means is I like to differentiate it from things like Zoom or Google Hangouts or things like that, where you are for example, with Zoom, downloading an application in many cases, and it's got a full suite of like room creation and stuff in the back, but you're not really doing a whole lot with an API, or something like Google Hangouts, where it's very tightly focused for a very specific need, which with Google Hangouts is multiple people in a room, generally talking, doing screen sharing, that kind of stuff. Vonage Video is a little bit lower level than that. We can do all of those things, but we go a little bit lower level and allow you to have a lot more control over the actual thing that you're building. So there's kind of three basic setups that you can do with a video application. One of the more popular ones, and probably one of the ones that most people come in contact with from like a customer service standpoint, is a one-to-one video application. If you have had the unfortunate chance to talk with, like, say, your insurance company, or like, do a telemedicine talk where it's just you and a doctor or you and a claims agent, that's a one-to-one video application. So for example, early last year, and right after the pandemic started, had my basement flood. So I had to contact my insurance, and the claims adjuster, when he called me back, said, hey, we'll just do a video chat, sent me an SMS with a link, clicked on it, that popped open on my phone. I shared my microphone and my rear camera and showed them what happened in the basement. So I had a nice chat with them, but it was me and the insurance agent. The other thing you can generally do with video applications is what's called one-to-many or broadcasting. That's a lot like basically we're doing right now. So there is usually one or very few people up on, we'll just call it a stage, but many people are watching a single person. Helps if I don't hit extra keys. A single person, as opposed to a lot of people watching each other. So that's what we call a one-to-many, or there's got a label here, one-to-n, because that's a lot easier to write. Or we have the many-to-many videos. So these are your kind of general, like, meeting-ish style video applications. So like a Google Hangout or like a traditional Zoom call, where you have a bunch of people all on a video call. You're all sharing your cameras. You're all sharing your microphones. That's a many-to-many video call. With the Vonage Video API, you can do any of these applications. It just depends on how you want to do your application. The nice thing is doing something as simple as going from like a one-to-one to a many-to-many video type application, there's almost like no extra code other than some like performance considerations you need to think about. So the application today, we will technically be doing a many-to-many application. The only difference between that and a one-to-one application for this would be just stopping extra people from joining the call. The code works both ways. The one-to-many, it's a slightly different API we're not going to go over today, but you can use that to broadcast out like we're doing here, but also broadcast out to other RTMP services like Google Video, what is it, YouTube Live or whatever they're calling it nowadays, Twitch, things like that, where you can actually like broadcast and stream out to them. So you can do all of that through the Vonage Video API. The other nice thing that we do is we do recording for you as well, so you don't have to figure out how to composite these videos and like stick them all together and come up with like a nice recording out of it. We offer ways to like automatically lay out the videos for you and record those for you in real time, and then we can either host those for, I think it's like 72 hours after they're done, or we can even push it up to an S3 or an Azure cloud storage bucket. But we offer the ability to like start a recording, stop a recording, have those shoved off so that you can keep those for perpetuity or do whatever. But it's a very simple API call. We're not going to go over it today, but realistically, to start an archive is a single API call. To stop it is another API call. And one of the nice things about our service is it's fully GDPR and HIPAA compliant. So if you are in the medical industry or you're looking at building a medical type application, that is something that we do offer. I believe all of our APIs are GDPR compliant, but not everything is HIPAA compliant because those are two totally separate things. So if you're looking at using any of our other APIs, check with which specific ones we're doing. Like, for example, I know like our SMS API is not currently HIPAA compliant, but we're working toward that. Because it turns out it's really hard to safeguard plain text information as you're sending it across the wire in the case of SMS. But we have a lot of financial and health and sensitive industries that use our video API. So we're fully compliant, and that helps safeguard a lot of your customer information and makes it a lot less you have to build to worry about that. So with a video application, there are usually going to be two sides, especially when you start talking about like building with an API system itself. The first of those and the most visible part of that is the client side. So all of our technologies are built on the WebRTC standard. So this is something that all of your major browsers will support. So Chrome, Firefox, Safari, any recently up-to-date telephone, even their like little built-in browsers generally will work fine with WebRTC. But it also means that we can be completely cross-platform. So I am sure that we are probably stretching the gamut on the number of operating systems that is, between watching and presenting. So for example, I am on Ubuntu right now, so I'm on Linux. I know that there are people watching that are on Mac. I know that there are people watching that I'm sure are on Windows. So anything that supports WebRTC, we support as well. And then we offer a couple SDKs for the client side, depending on exactly what you want to do. Today, we're going to be going over our JavaScript front-end application. This is different than our Node.js application, which is the back-end, the server side. But we offer SDKs for JavaScript, iOS, and Android for your kind of native-ish type applications, both doing like the JavaScript to native, like React Native stuff, but also like actual iOS and Android packages. So you don't have to use like the like those in-between systems. And then Linux and Windows clients as well. If you need to run on like a Windows desktop application or like in a Linux embedded system, we have a lot of customers that will use the Linux SDK to run on an embedded platform that just like connects a camera up to the system, things like that. So we offer a huge platform that you can use right out of the box. Now with the other side, that's the server side. We are very polyglot with that as well. So we offer 6 languages for the SDKs. I don't have them listed on here. But we have PHP, obviously, we're using that today. Node.js, like I mentioned. I'm sure I will always forget one. We also offer Ruby, .NET, Java, and Python. That's 6. I got all 6 of them without having to think about it too much. So any language for the server-side stuff, we cover most of the popular languages. Otherwise, it's just a REST API. So if you're using another language, like say you're doing some of the embedded stuff, you want to use Rust, or you want to use whatever language you're using that I didn't offer, you can just access this through an HTTP interface. All the server-side stuff, it's a really simple API, really easy to use. Most of the SDK is handling a lot of the authentication work and wrapping some of the workflows for you to make things a little bit easier. But the server side itself actually handles mostly the management type stuff when it comes to the video. So it doesn't really interact with the actual video itself. So there's not a whole lot of ways to manipulate that from the server side. But really what it handles is like creating those sessions or those rooms in OpenTalk, triggering your archive stuff, reading events as they come in. A really big thing is token generation, because we are using client-side code. We don't want to give full credentials out. So the server-side applications generally will generate those kind of user-implemented tokens. And then also our signaling API, which allows us to pass data, small bits of textual data back and forth between everybody or individual clients as we kind of need to. So the server side, it's a lot less flashy than the client side, but it still has a lot of important stuff that you need to take into account when you're building a full-on application. And if you're looking at this just purely from a PHP standpoint, why did we go with Laravel? For the most part, Laravel is a very easy framework to get started in. It's also one of the largest communities that we have in PHP. So if you need help with anything, additional resources, finding people to hire or work on, there's tons of Laravel-based developers out there. From a demoing standpoint, it's really nice that it offers quick scaffolding, but it also allows us to build these applications that turns out are very, very scalable. So the stuff that you take today is not just toy code. You can take the code from here and build off to whatever you need without having to re-implement it or throw away and do it in another language. Laravel has proven itself to be extremely scalable, especially with some of the new initiatives with like its Octane product with Swool and I think what's called Vapor, the one that runs on Lambda. There is no problem taking the code we do here today and easily pushing that forward for into the production in the future. And then, of course, easy local development. The tool chain for this is very, very tiny. Basically, as long as you've got PHP, Composer, and NPM installed, that's all you need. So gets us really off the ground fairly quickly. Also makes my life easier for demos. But otherwise, like I said, you can take all of this stuff forward and not worry about having to throw it away or thinking of this as just as a toy. So let's get started to actually get set up on Laravel. If you want to follow along, there is a GitHub repo where you can actually get some of the sample code, and I accidentally closed that tab. So let me get that here real quick. OpenTalk demo. And Amanda has already pasted it in the chat. Thank you very much. So the way this is broken up, if you download that sample code, it's designed, if you get stuck, you can always switch branches. So check the README. There should be, every time we hit kind of one of these like section header type slides, that is a branch you can switch to and then start to work off of. So you can either just kind of follow along and keep that as a reference point. It has all of the code that I'm going to demo all the way up through the end broken up, or use this as a starting point. You can also start completely from scratch, up to you. But that way you've got that as a reference in case you get too far behind or something is just not working. Because again, we've only got a couple of hours to get through most of this. So the setup for Laravel is actually very, very easy. There's two ways to do it. The first, let me bring back my control module, is using one of their newer projects called Laravel Sail. If you are using Docker, this is a really cool tool that they have. This actually goes through and containerizes a full Laravel development stack for you, sets everything up for you right out of the gate. It is a little bit customizable, so you can like turn on different services and stuff like this. But basically, you can use a curl command. It'll download a little setup script that downloads all the Docker container, the Docker Compose files, all that kind of stuff. You can basically go to laravel.build / give it a project name. So in this case, you can use Vonage Video. Pipe that through Bash. It'll go through and get it set up. Or As always, piping through bash is probably not the safest thing. You can check the script out before you run it, before piping it through. But this is completely run by the Laravel developers, like the actual core developers, so should be fairly safe. Once that downloads everything, you can just go into the Vonage video folder it creates and do a sail up, and that will actually start a full development suite. So if I pop over to this tab, you don't have to worry about actually reading specifically what's on here, but you get a full Docker output if you are familiar with that. So I've got Mailhog and the search backend fighting vigorously for attention as something hits /health. But the only downside to this is if you are starting from scratch today and you don't already have it downloaded and installed, it can take a while to get set up. The initial setup is about 15 minutes. Because it has to download all the packages, or download all the initial images, download all the packages into the images, and that can take a while. I timed it last night on my laptop, which is a Ryzen 4900U, so it's either a six core or an 8 core processor, a lot of RAM. Takes about 15 minutes. So if you don't already have it running today like I do, I would probably look at the bare metal steps, which we'll do here in a second. But long term, this is great. You can take an existing application and run it. Or pop it up, for a brand new application. I've been using this a lot lately. The other option is what I would call bare metal, basically running it directly on your computer. And let me get these slides back so you can see that. The other option is bare metal. There's nothing wrong with running PHP directly on your computer, and the demo today will fully support that. So don't worry about having to have a big development suite set up. You can go ahead and use that right away. It's pretty easy to install. Laravel fully supports just installing directly on your computer. So you can do Composer, create project, Laravel/Laravel, Vonage Video, or whatever project name you want to do on the end there. That'll go out to Composer, grab everything from the GitHub repository, download it to the computer, install the dependencies, and it'll pretty much be ready to use out of the box. There's a small couple configuration tweaks we'll do here in a second, just for the purposes of the demo. But otherwise, you could actually go into the folder and use their artisan command line tool to immediately start working. Now, for the demo itself, there are a couple of little tweaks we'll make just to make the demo easier. First and foremost is for the database. Because we're working this as a true application, that means we'll actually need to store some data at some point. So I recommend using SQLite as your database connection. So you can go into your .env file. There'll be a section there that has a whole bunch of DB underscore options. Basically delete everything but DB connection and DB database, and change DB connection from, I think the default is MySQL. And then DB database will just need to be a full path to where you would like this file to exist. So I've put it in the root of this project directory. So in the case on my computer, that's going to be home, C Tankersley, projects, Vonage Video, and then I just call it database.SQLite. As long as you have the full path in there, that's all that matters. If you're using Windows, just make sure that you're putting the slashes as forward slashes. So like C:// users. Windows will use that just fine. Windows will use forward or backward slashes. It's actually pretty forgiving in that regard compared to some other things. If you're using WSL on Windows, make sure you use the Unix path, not the like the mounted path, like the $$ Ubuntu or whatever it is pathing. You'll actually want to use what it is inside the WSL container itself. Once that's set up, the only other thing you'll need to do is drop down to the command line and run php artisan migrate. This will run any existing migrations that are sitting out there, which is basically just some user setup stuff, and go through and clean that up. If you do want to use a different database, you can go ahead and do that. We won't be able to provide much help with getting those set up because we won't know what your database actual setup or credentials or anything like that are. So really highly recommend just using the SQLite database and going with that. If you have any questions with that, pop it in the chat. Hopefully we can get those resolved for you. Most of the time SQLite works right out of the box. And then other than that, that is actually everything you need to get Laravel running. The installation itself is actually pretty quick. So take a look at the chat. Do we have any questions so far? probably not, because this is pretty boilerplate. And if you've done Laravel, this is all pretty straightforward. Okay, awesome. So we're doing okay. So now we have our base kind of framework set up. This by itself doesn't really buy us a whole lot. We kind of need user authentication on this as well. So that is where Laravel Breeze comes in. Laravel Breeze is basically an authentication system built off of Jetstream, which is a much lower level product. But what this really gives you is a ton of the boilerplate that you would normally have to use, not just in terms of templates, but also in like actual configuration boilerplate for setting up authentication that works for, I would say, a good 90% of all web applications. There are some very common steps that can easily be forgotten or misunderstood when it comes to user authentication. And we live in a world nowadays where it seems like I am seeing data breaches left and right. I've lost count of the number of times my information has been stolen. The future is wonderful. But what Laravel Breeze does is it takes a lot of those best practices out of the gate, sets all of that up for you, but is still extensible for those cases where you do need to do something special with your application. So all of those templates get created. All of the good default settings are created. So there's things like your passwords are salted and hashed by default, so you don't have to worry about accidentally storing passwords in clear text. It sets up your user models properly, all that kind of stuff. As you build out your application, it does have full user profile support built right on in. So a user can go in, sign up, edit their profile, fix their email, all that kind of stuff. Allows password resets, like just a ton of stuff out of the box that you don't want to have to build. And then if you do need it, one of the things they tout is what they call team support. It's basically groupings of users. We are not really going to take advantage of the user profile or the team support stuff. It's a little bit above and beyond what we need to do today. But we do want to take authentication into account because we want to be able to like track who's actually accessing our application. We probably don't want just everybody jumping into meetings. So that's a very important part that I think we would need to have set up for this. So the installation itself is pretty easy. So it's just a developer package that you can install, Laravel/Breeze. So we can just do composer require Laravel/Breeze --dev. One of the reasons we do --dev is there's nothing in the code itself that you need to run day to day. All of this is developer setup-y kind of stuff. Once it's kind of in there, we don't really need the package anymore, so it's just a development level package. Then we go through and we actually install Breeze, which will drag all of the files up to a place where they get put into an area where we can actually edit. And then this does work with, I believe it's Livewire and Tailwind CSS. So there are some NPM packages that it needs to download for this. This is about the only time we'll be doing anything with NPM, because even when we get into our JavaScript, I'm not going to get into the whole like setting up like a full web chain for all this. We're going to be dirty and we're going to put JavaScript directly in a template file. But you can do an npm install and then run dev. That'll build any necessary JavaScript files and any CSS files we need. And then if there's any leftover migrations, you can run PHP artisan migrate to get that going. So what I should be able to do, I already have the base Laravel installed. Let me make sure I do have that installed. I do. So like I said, I'm going to use Sail. So we are going to composer require Laravel Breeze dev. Should go fairly quick for me because I've downloaded it. I don't know how many times already. Cool. So we've got that. And then I should be able to do Sail artisan Breeze install. And scaffolding installed successfully. So this is how easy it is to actually get a lot of the stuff installed. So now I just need to do an npm install. Whoops. Sail in there. This will go through and just download all of those packages. The Livewire, I think, is the biggest thing that it grabs a whole bunch of files for. I downloaded those pretty quickly. I've got a lot of stuff cached already. And then we are going to run dev. This will build all of that stuff. And this should take how many steps are there? I think there's like 70 steps in total, but it goes fairly quickly. Awesome. That all built. And just to make sure we don't have anything laying around. Migrate. Cool. So we went through this, builds all of our tables. I didn't run the initial migrate. I had to dump a database. That's the reason it ran probably a whole bunch, potentially more than yours. And cool. I already see one problem, which I'm going to run into later because I didn't delete a file. So we'll deal with that when we get there. That's the beauty of live coding. But that went through, ran all of our migrations. And I should now be able to go to localhost. So I get my Laravel screen. And if I go to register, I get a registration screen, which is awesome. So I will need a user account. So I'm going to go ahead and sign myself up for one. And that's it. So we have out of the box, and in probably 15-ish minutes, I don't know how long I've been talking about Laravel itself, a super simple authentication system all the way working. And that gets us kind of to the next section. So one of the things that you do get along with all of this stuff, just to know where some of these things get dumped, once we install Breeze, it's going to set up a new route/auth.php file. That is going to have all of the routes. You don't need to know what's in there right now. Basically, just know that if you need to change any of those routes, like you want to change it from like /register to /app/register or whatever, you know, where is my login route actually pointing to, stuff like that. You can go to auth.php. It'll have all those routes for you. It will have created a new resources/views/auth folder. This will be all of those template files. So we just saw the registration files. That's the register.blade.php file. There's two-factor auth stuff in here. So if you need to, you know, obviously go in, like the default theme is probably not what you want. You can go in, edit these files, play with them. And then depending on, because it seems like they moved some of the stuff around a little bit, you may have a profiles folder as well, which has all of your profile stuff. Otherwise, now I think it's just bundled in with the dashboard type things. But there's a ton of views out there now that you can go and play with as you need to. So let me get our register page and the login. So let me pop back over to chat and see how everybody is going. Does anybody have any questions on anything up through so far? A lot of this is just kind of like real setup-y stuff. So no questions. Okay, awesome. The next thing we're going to want to do, we'll take a break from the code for just a moment, and we're going to click some buttons. We need to create a project. So the way everything is kind of structured in the video API, every kind of overarching project or system that you're doing has a project associated with it. So if you go to talkbox.com/account and log in, you can use an existing project if you've already got one that you want to play with. Otherwise, we can set up a new project. So if I go to talkbox.com, talkbox.com/account, and I log in, we will get, I know why it's complaining about that. You probably shouldn't get that pop-up. I know why I get it. But here you'll get your kind of main dashboard. Over on the side, we'll have projects. But you can go through and set up individual projects for each of your things. So I've got a couple demo things all throughout here. But just so I don't accidentally leak any credentials, we're going to go through this picture by picture because I don't like rotating passwords. So you go to login, you get your login screen, like I said. Over on the left-hand side, there will be a projects link. You can click that. You'll get a little slide out, and down at the bottom, there will be a create new project button. You can click on that, and you'll get two types of projects. So we do try to cater to as much, you're cutting out as much and getting directly to what you want right away. So we offer two different types of projects depending on what you want to do. One is a simple chat embed. So this is not what we're doing today, because we would be done with this demo super duper quick, and we wouldn't need Laravel or any of that stuff. So it's a super short 15-minute demo. But if you have an existing site where you don't have control over the system, like say you're running on WordPress.com, or you're running on like Wix or Squarespace or things like that, where you can't directly edit the code and do all of these custom things that we're going to do, we offer video chat embeds. So you can generate what amounts to an iframe, dump it into a page, and it should work. I think there are some providers that kind of mess with our iframe and they don't work quite correctly. I think it's all laid out in our support pages. But if you just need to drop a video chat embed on a page, that is literally the quickest way. The downside to it is you can't really customize the way it looks. You can't really customize the way it acts. It really is just kind of a very bare bones, I just need to have video chat on my website. What we want to do is use the video API side. So we would click create custom project down there at the bottom. This allows us to use the entire range of the API and do whatever we want. So all you need to do is give it a name and select a preferred codec. Generally, just leave it VP8. That is supported by all of the major browsers, tends to be a little bit more performant than H.264, which is the other option. So unless you have a really good reason to change it, just leave it VP8, should be fine. And then you will get a project created screen with an API key and a secret, which we will need here in a moment. You can go back later and get these keys, so don't worry about grabbing them now and, oh, I accidentally didn't click the copy for the secret, or, I accidentally pasted over the wrong one, whatever. You can always go back into the project screen and re-get these credentials, but they'll give them to you right here so we can use them. So if you're following along, go ahead and take note of what those are, or at least leave this screen open to where you can pull it back up. I think if you click the OK button at the bottom of here, it'll drop you into the product page and you can get those right back. For me, I'll do that here in a minute. But yeah, keep track of those and we will do with it from there. The next section is actually going to be setting up Vonage. So we offer the SDK, and that's super simple to set up. Most of what we're going to be doing here is making it easier to work with Laravel. So it's kind of a reminder on the server side. The reason we need this is kind of the session management, especially, and the token generation. Those are the two big things. If you look at a lot of demos, the reason they are so simple and quick is you're creating one session. You're probably generating one token. That's probably very super long-lived. In the real world, though, that's not the way your workflow is going to work. Your sessions you're going to be creating kind of on demand as you have different groups of people that want to be put together. That's the best way to think about a session. A session is just a group of connections you want to put together all at once. But you're going to probably be making multiple groupings of those. You don't want to have to go in manually and create those all the time. You don't want to hard code those session names and things like that. So you need to have something that is able to quickly and easily create those sessions. That's one of the big things we do with the server side. The other side is the token generation. Like I said, because we do interact with client-facing code, and that client-facing code needs to authenticate, we need to do that in a safe and restricted as possible manner. So the server side can generate short-lived tokens that can be very tightly focused to just the specific user that you're trying to log in, as opposed to, I think if you go to the dashboard and you generate like a token, it's like a 24-hour token with like a bunch of permissions that you hard code into your application. I don't want to walk you down that path. I want you to get this set up the way you would normally be doing this. So we're going to use the server side to generate those tokens. And then again, the archive management and the signaling are extra things you can do on top of that. But the big thing most of your application code is going to be doing is session management and token generation. So we do offer a PHP package, super easy to install and should work with most applications. So to get that to work, we just need to do a composer require opentalk/opentalk. So we bring my window back up here. And that'll go through, Cool. I need a token. Let me steal this real quick. Oh, you know what? I know why it's doing that. Oh, this is always fun. This totally breaks my terminal. Yep. No, I know. Reset. There we go. Okay, cool. So I need to do this in Sail because I always still forget to do it in there. Composer require open talk / open talk. So if you're not using Sail, it would just be composer require open talk. This will go through, download the package, install it into your system. It should work with any major PHP library that you have set up. We do require Guzzle 6 or 7. We will work with either one. But if you are on a very old version of Guzzle, you may run into compatibility problems with it. For example, we don't support Guzzle 5. So if you're using a really old version of Laravel or you've got an existing application, we may run into conflict with that. We try to keep up to date as much as possible with what's popular out there. So Guzzle 6 and 7 should work. We automatically determine which one you have and work with it. So should work with any major recent framework. I think we support Laravel back to 6. I know we do 7 and 8. Obviously, we're doing 8 today. But I think we go all the way back to Laravel 6 technically. And then we work with Symfony, we work with Drupal, we work with Laminus. All of the major frameworks out there are using either 6 or 7 now anyway. So that gets us set up for the actual package. Now, this doesn't inform Laravel at all that this package exists. It just exists on the system now. So what we want to do is actually get this wired into Laravel because that will make maintaining the system and working with the OpenTalk client much easier over the long run. So those two key, the key and secret that we copied earlier, we're going to want to go into our M file and create 2 new variables, OpenTalk_key and OpenTalk_secret. So you can drop those in there. I'm going to steal this for just a moment, so that way you don't see my key and secret. So we're going to grab from keep beeping. That's fine. To here. And I'm sure this is super exciting watching me do this completely off the screen, but I don't want to have to rotate my keys. Okay, cool. So my key and secret are in there. So move that back there and bring our slides back up. So the reason we put it in here is for maintenance reasons and kind of application extensibility reasons. Any of your configuration stuff really should be passed via the environment. The easiest way to emulate that is through the .env file that Laravel supports. So you can go in there, drop those variables in there, and then we will reference them later in our application to actually pull that through. Now, the way we actually tell Laravel that we are going to build a service is to create what's called a provider. This will work with the service provider system, which is essentially a service locator or dependency injection system that will allow us to more easily declare our dependencies between different classes and have them automatically pushed into them for us. So it cuts down on a lot of the boilerplate code. So we're going to make a provider for ourselves. Going to make provider open talk provider. I'm going to give us a real quick succession message. Provider already exists because I've already got the code installed. That's why. You should get a little thing saying the provider is created. And then we need to actually wire that up and do something. So we need to tell Laravel that this thing exists. So if we go into the config/app.php, we just need to add it there. Let's see if, because some of this code already seems to exist. Thought I had done a clean checkout, but it's too late now. If we scroll down in here, not all the way down. Nope, we didn't get it in there. So I've only got some code that exists. We can add our open talk. Am I just in the wrong folder? Is that my problem? I am. Okay, hold on just a second. close that. We're going to reopen it. And that doesn't exist in there. Okay, cool. Live coding. This is why you never do it. App providers. Oh, I bet I know why. We are going to sail down. Yes, it wouldn't be a live workshop without some sort of hiccup. And then, of course, I'm using Docker, which makes things take slightly longer. So we're just shut everything down and restart it. That looks better. Do I have? No, I closed code. So let's get that back up and running. And then now this should type in. There we go. Now we're working. There we go. So we scroll down to in the app.php folder. We can scroll down to, yep, I'm still zoomed in. The application providers. We can add our OpenTalk provider that will let know Laravel that every time it boots up, read in this file, do whatever work that needs to do. The next thing we actually need to do is tell the system what to do, basically. So if we go into that file now, which we'll go to in here in just a second, pretty empty. It's not actually going to be doing anything. There'll be two methods in there, a register and a boot function. We don't care about the boot function. That's for like view level stuff that we're not really going to deal with right away. But we're going to be more interested in that register function. And we're going to do two things. One is we're going to register our OpenTalk client with the Laravel system. So what this means is we should be able to ask throughout the system for just an OpenTalk client, and the service provider system will return one to us. In this case of this specific code, we're going to also tell Laravel only ever make one copy of this. Don't make a whole bunch of copies. Most of the time, this is probably what you want to have happen. It's much more memory performant. Changes get propagated across those different copies of files as you kind of need to. The OpenTalk client itself doesn't really modify itself at all, I don't think. So you don't have to really worry about stuff like changing under the hood without you knowing. But we don't want to have a whole bunch of copies of these running around. So we have this make just a single one. If you are in a situation where you're using a single application with multiple projects, singleton won't work for you. There are better ways of doing it, but 9 times out of 10, this is probably what you want. So what this does is we say create a singleton of it. We're going to register to the name as just the OpenTalk class, and that's going to just take a callback function, which passes in our app, which is also our service container. And we're just going to return a new OpenTalk client, and we're going to grab the OpenTalk key and the OpenTalk secret from the environment. You will notice if you've done Laravel development before, or you dig into some of the other files, there is a getenv function that basically does the same thing. I'm doing this here. It's a little bit more cross development-y, because I've noticed some newer versions of PHP don't automatically drag in things into the getenv can pull it in, where the $_env super global works a lot better. But we're going to use those to create an OpenTalk client. And then because we need it for the front end, we're also going to take the API key, and we're going to store that as a configuration variable. The client side API needs to know which project we're working with. It's not really a secret, and having it published in the JavaScript scope by itself doesn't expose anything from a security standpoint, because you still need a key to go along with it. But we're going to store this off. We will eventually expose it to our template layer when we get to that point. But we're going to store that off. So let's pop back over to Visual Studio Code. I'm going to open up that provider. Like I said, we don't need, whoops, go back over there. We don't need the bootstrap. And we're just going to say that returns a void. Camera is stuttering a bit. I'm going to chalk that up to my internet. Hopefully that will drop off. We'll see. So we're going to do this app singleton, and we're going to do open talk class function app. And we're going to return a new open talk. I already know something's not going to work here. Let me make sure open talk actually installed properly. Cool. And let me also make sure, just to be safe, that free is installed. Give me just a minute. Looks like the slides are frozen as well. Okay. Actually not on slides right now, which is cool. I'm on the screen share. Let me turn off screen share and turn the screen share back on. We are almost to the point to do a break, so if we need to break, we can. Is my screen share working now? Hello world. It's working? Okay, awesome. Just making sure, just rerunning some of these things just to make sure I didn't screw stuff up. All right, send breeze and okay, that should be good enough to get us going. So there we go. I'm going to return a new open talk. MV open talk key. And secrets. If you do need to custom the client itself, there is a third options thing. We're not going to go with it through right now. But if you do need to have your application set additional settings, you can go through and do that as well. But we'll do that, and then we'll do a config set open talk key, and we will grab the key here. And then that should be everything we need to have set up for Laravel. So that leads us to our 10-minute break. There we go. Awesome. So hopefully everybody is all set. Again, if you are just following along, that's great as well. Feel free to ask any questions as we go through. And here we go. So from break time, we are going to go to actually start looking at some code and actually getting a video application up and running. So we're going to start working on our first room. I'm going to call this room because for what we are doing, we want to have a group of people in a room all talking at once. And we're going to hard code some things here just to make it easier to show and make sure all of the bits and pieces are working. So we'll see if I need to do any other quick cleanup on the code as we go along, since I should have shut down my Docker containers and restarted them. So in a nutshell, what we want to do is we want to have users be able to visit a URL to join a room. And we're going to call it a room because we're going to pretend it's like a real space, so we can have multiples of these things going on at once if we need to. But the idea is everybody's going to go to one singular place. We're going to talk. In the back end, the system is going to check to see if we have already created a session for this room. And if not, we're going to create one. And then by the time we get to it, we're actually going to pass credentials and stuff and make it all work. But what we're going to work on right now are the top 3 items. Setting up that URL, checking to see if sessions exist, and then we're going to create one. This is going to introduce our kind of first foray into the different things you need to think about when dealing with the video application. A lot of the things in the video API, you do need to keep track of because they are somewhat stateful. They kind of come and go, or they're kind of culled and then brought back later if they are needed. So things like session IDs or connection IDs, we really actually need to track those on the server side. Part of that is just from a resource standpoint, it's much easier for us to store it on our end. There's no real way to actually look up to see what sessions exist in a project because they are kind of ephemeral. They kind of only exist when they need to. And then especially with like connections and things like that, you may have a huge amount of them. And it's kind of, and a good majority of them you may not care about in some cases. So it's up to your application to figure out which ones are actually important to you. You can get all that information in real time through like our eventing system and things like that. It's a little bit above and beyond what we're going to do with today. But just know that when it comes to like connection IDs, session IDs, stuff like that, you really do want to keep track of a lot of those things yourself. So to be able to facilitate our first 3 bullet points here, we are going to need a controller. So if you've not used Laravel before, it follows the web MVC pattern. I specifically say web MVC. If you have come from other languages that use MVC type patterns, especially like GUI applications like Smalltalk or C# or things like that, MVC, which stands for Model View Controller, on the web work a little bit differently, especially in PHP, because we generally don't have state from request to request. PHP is very much a user accesses a page, we start completely from scratch, do whatever the user wants us to do, and then we shut all the way down. So we have a very strict view of how all of that kind of works. But out of the MVC type thing, the first thing we need to do is have a controller. The controller is where all of our, where a lot of our business logic will live. So creating those sessions, making sure that we have the appropriate data models for all of those, that all gets usually done inside of a controller. So let's go ahead and make a controller here real quick. Should have added that in there. Save that off there. So we are going to do an artisan take controller, room controller. And it shouldn't tell me that it was already existed. Okay, great. It said it was created successfully. So now this controller is going to be pretty bare bones. If I open this now, there's nothing there because Laravel doesn't know what we want to do. So we need to do something with it. Let's pop over to here. So now we're actually going to build out this controller. And this is where we're starting to see the wiring that we did before and how some of those things are starting to take shape. So there's a couple of things that we need to keep track of as we build this out. The first is our API key and that OpenTalk client. And this is the reason why we kind of shove this off to a service provider. One of the ways to keep a well-maintained system is think about the responsibility that everything is doing. The responsibility for controlling rooms falls to my room controller. That does not include creating my OpenTalk clients. That's why we shove that off to a provider. But we need access to that. So there's a dependency for our controller on that OpenTalk client. So we're going to pass that in through the constructor. This is, if you've never come across it before, this is an example of constructor dependency injection. So whenever this controller object is created, we need to also pass in an OpenTalk client. Technically, we also need the OpenTalk key. There's no easy way to auto-wire that, so we're kind of we're going to ignore that. But in a well-maintained system, we would also force the key to also be passed in at the same time. But this is where we're kind of working in the conventions of Laravel. So we're going to have the OpenTalk client injected in, and then we're going to pull up that config, and we're going to get the OpenTalk key. So essentially what happens is whenever someone's going to hit our room URL, we're going to tell Laravel, hey, whenever someone hits /room, and we'll do this in a second, whenever someone hits /room, create a room controller object. Laravel's going to look at that. It's going to say that thing needs an OpenTalk client as a dependency. It's going to go to the service provider. It's going to notice that we created one right here. it's going to return a copy of that and shove it into our method, and we're going to store that off. So let's go ahead and copy this code over to here. And give us a constructor. And the nice thing about using the service provider, all of this happens in the back end. I did not have to actually tell the system that, you know, we need this or how to get that. It just knows how to do that. Not post, open, talk, and then this key is config get open talk key. And then let's, oops, I don't need class in there. Get rid of that. We're going to add in open talk. So again, we're going to pass in the open talk client. We're going to store that off. We will use this later to actually create our things or create our sessions and all that kind of stuff. And then we're going to take that key and we're going to save it off. So that should be all we need for there. Now, I keep using the word rooms and sessions and all that stuff. We need to be able to associate a room, or what amounts to a room and a URL, to a session. Now, a session ID is just a random gobbledygook of numbers that do have a meaning, but if you just look at that, you have no idea what it actually means. It's a whole bunch of wrapped up stuff. So we need to save off that session ID to a room name. So the way we do that in Laravel is, this is where we're getting into our model layer, the M part of MVC. So we're going to create a model. We're going to call it a room, and that's where we're actually going to store the session information. All we really need is the ID, but that's what we're going to store that off. So Laravel, as part of its framework, has a system called Eloquent, which uses what's called the active record pattern. What that means is, from a database standpoint, each type of data, so in this case, room is a type of data, a user would also be a type of data, those will live in their own individual tables, and those tables will have a column for each attribute of that thing. So in our case, a room is going to have a database row ID, it's going to have a session ID, it's going to have a room name, and it's also going to have a created time, just so we keep track of when these things were created. A user might have, and does have in our system, an email address and a name. So those would be columns that exist in those tables. And what Eloquent does is it allows us to very easily move from having the data stored in a database into an object in PHP without us having to write any SQL. So let's make a model for this, and we will get some of that ball rolling. So we're going to go back to Artisan. We're going to make a model, and we're going to do a migration. Now, with models, a model is just a generic term for something that has data in it. It does not necessarily mean database backed. So whenever we create a model in Laravel, that model doesn't actually inform the database of anything. So we're going to create what's called a database migration, which is a little bit of code that tells the system how to actually migrate and add this table to the system with the things that we want. There are ways of like having it auto do it, but this is probably the best way. And then the dash just tells it we're done with options, and we're going to call it a room. So if everything works properly, we will get model created successfully. This is going to create our model file, which we will look at here in just a moment, but also a migration file. So what this does is this will have this will be some code with instructions on how to update the database. Go back to the slides. So let's go ahead and update the database itself. So we're going to have a create rooms table migration. We're going to pop over to here. And I know one of the things I will have to clean up here in just a second is I'm going to cheat a little bit. We're going to get rid of this old one here. Nope, actually, I bet that was the new one, wasn't it? Did I just mess that up? Nope, I deleted the old one. Okay, good. And then don't look at the man behind the curtain. Drop table rooms. The one thing I forgot to, since we were in that kind of like weird state earlier, it actually remade the rooms table. So I just need to clean this up real quick because I forgot to do this during the break. Select, what is my migrations table? For migrations, ID equals 4. I think we're all okay. Good. We're in a good reproducible set. Nobody saw anything. But let's go ahead and create a table. So, like I said, we're going to have an ID, a timestamp, and then we're also going to store off the session ID and the name. Those are the two important things that we need to store off. So the nice thing is all of this stuff is already kind of like pre-set up for us. So ID already exists, timestamps already exist. So we're just going to tell it this table is going to also have a string column called session ID. And we're going to duplicate that. And we're going to call it name as well. Using the migration system is really nice. So while on the slide, if you go back through the slides and look, I don't show the down. You can actually migrate up and down. So here we're creating a room with, well, will be 5 columns because timestamps is actually 2 columns. We're creating a table here. If we need to reverse this, it automatically sets that up, drops the table. So while you're doing development, makes it real easy if you screw up and you need to rebuild a table. Unlike how I screwed it up here just a second ago, that required manual intervention. So that creates our new migration. And then the next thing we will need to do is, so there's the columns we're making. We will migrate that. So we will run an artisan migrate, which should create the table correctly. If I clean this up properly, awesome, it did. So now that table should actually exist because remember, it didn't exist before. But now that table should actually be migrated. The other reason you would want to use this is as you move things from development to production, you would also run these migrations. These migrations have all the steps needed to make sure your database in production matches the layout you have in development. So that's the reason you kind of save these things off. So you would actually store these migrations and make this as part of your actual like deployment procedure if you were going to production. But now we should have a new good table. Next thing we need to do is we actually need to tell Laravel about those fields. Because you'll notice when I created the model, I didn't tell it anything about it other than a name. So it doesn't know any of the stuff that is already there. It can intuit some of those things when it does like a select. But it's not always super duper smart about that. And sometimes you do, it's assuming some conventions with this. But to be able to set some of these data, especially fairly easily, we need to actually tell it that these fields actually exist and that they're valid. So this is the fillable property. So we'll look at this in just a second. So if we go into the model, it's going to be pretty empty. We just need to tell it that we are allowed to fill name and session ID in bulk, basically, and that these are the column names and these are what we expect to have actually happen. So if we open up room.php, so again here, this is not showing fillable. So we will add a protected fillable equals name and session ID. That's it. Some other database migration systems or generally what are called ORMs, which are like object relational mapper systems. They may have you like set up a whole bunch of more boilerplate. For Laravel, basically, there's just a couple places you need to tell it about columns and things, and it figures out all the rest of it. So that should be all we need to be able to create a room. Let's pop back over to here. Now we actually need to use those in our controller. Again, our controller is where a lot of our business logic lies. So if we remember back to what exactly we wanted to do, we wanted to be able to have a user hit our URL. So we'll do that part in just a second. But then we need to look up the room and see if it exists. So we're going to do that here. So we're just going to basically use the room object. This also acts as a like a data access layer. So we can say where name, and we're just going to hard code demo room for right now. We're just going to make sure all of our bits work. We're going to look for a room called demo room, and we're going to grab the first one. By default, if you leave off first, it's going to try to grab an array of them. But we're just going to say, give me the first one. I don't care what it is. If you've used Laravel before, you may have also seen first or fail as a method name. That actually causes the system to generate like a 404 message. We don't want that to happen. It's okay if the room doesn't exist because we will create it if needed. It's not a catastrophic failure if it doesn't exist. So we're just going to use first. And then we're basically going to say if there is no room, we're going to use the OpenTalk client that we saved off earlier. We're going to create a session. That's going to return some session data from the API. That's going to get dumped into the session variable. And then we're going to create a new room. And we're going to give it a name. Right now, we're hard coding it to demo room, but we will use the session ID that's returned. So we're going to say new room with a name of this and a session ID of that. And then we're going to save it. That should save the room off for later. So any subsequent requests should get the same session ID. And then for right now, we're just going to do what's called dump and die. We're just going to dump these values out just to make sure that all of these bits and pieces are working. So let's go back to the room controller. Make this a little bit bigger. Public function join room. And we're going to say room equals room where name demo room first. If not room, session equals this. Create session. So now there are things you can do for the sessions that we're not doing in here, like moderation things, some like layout stuff as well. We're not worrying about any of that right now. We're just creating a raw session. We'll handle all of that stuff ourselves. And then because the room doesn't exist, we're going to make a new room with a name of, for right now, demo room, with a session ID of the session object, and we're going to get the session ID off of it. And like I said, because we're using Eloquent under the hood, we get access to a lot of the data access stuff as well. So we could just do room save. It knows how to talk to the database. It knows how to save it all off. We don't have to worry about it. And then we're going to dump and die. Room name. Yeah, we'll do name instead of ID. That makes more sense. Room session ID. So that gets us our business logic. We still don't have a good way of actually showing or like actually getting to the URL. So this is where we're going to set up our route. What a route does is it says take a URL and map that to a controller and some method on that controller. And then any other little bits we want to do with it, we can give it a name. In this case, we want to make sure that whoever is accessing a room is authenticated. So we're going to use the auth middleware, which basically just makes sure that are you a user with a logged in ID. If not, it'll actually handle directing us to the login page, which is really, really great. But this stops this is a very, very simple way to stop drive-by drop-ins. So the nice thing is it's pretty easy to set these routes up. So these just go into the web PHP file in routes. So we'll put that in here. So we use the route. We're going to just say it's a GET request. We're just going to hard code this to room. We will expand this out later. But right now, again, we're just testing to make sure all these bits work. We're going to use the room controller and tell it to use join room on that. So this is what's called a callable. If you're not familiar with this in PHP, a callable can be an array of an object class and a method. So it'll be able to actually figure out it's a room controller. Then that gets piped through the service provider system, which then knows it needs an OpenTalk client. And that's just a lot of magic happens under the hood for this that we don't have to worry about. And then we're going to grab a middleware called auth. And again, that's just going to make sure that authentication is required. So if that all works, because we have done a ton of coding up to that point, in theory, I should now be able to hit localhost/room. And if you're following along, you should be able to as well. and you should get back. I actually changed it so it's going to display a name instead of an ID number, but it should display a room name and then just a gobbledygook of code. So let me find that appropriate window. Should be this one right here. So originally we were on the dashboard. We're going to go to /room. It blows up. Why did we? Oh, you know what? I'm not logged in. Oh, and I do need to run these. This is a screw up from where we didn't close the Docker containers earlier. So we're going to do npm install. I think this is probably okay, but it might reinstall everything. Basically, the Breeze stuff didn't compile because it compiled under a different container. Containers are hard. When it didn't do all this the first time, it should have told me. I screwed something up. But again, this is what you're all here for, to watch me flail around with code. So once this is npm installed, we will run the build again. There won't be any other migrations to run. The build doesn't take very long. Internet. Almost done. Come on, taskbar. There you go. Yeah, run dev. This is why I love PHP. You just do stuff and stuff works. I don't have to wait for compilations. Now I should get a pretty, okay, I got my pretty login file back. Log in. There we go. Okay, cool. So because I had screwed up, more than likely yours probably worked, but because I screwed up the containers, I had to restart everything. It basically logged me back out. So here we see demo room. That is the name we gave our room. And then we get this just random junk of stuff. This is our session ID. Now, I should be able to drop back down to our database. If you're using SQLite, you'll have to get a SQLite thing. Realistically, it should probably work. You don't have to check it, but this is just going to be a nice look at the database. Select all from rooms. So there we see we have our room name. It's got an ID of 1. We created it just a little bit ago. 35. So yep, a minute ago. This is running UTC, which is why that says 23 instead of it's currently 7 o'clock for me. And then that session ID, which is great. So we got the most of the bullet points working. So basically, demo room didn't exist, and we created the session for it. Like I said, it's part of that. If I refresh the screen, let me see if I can make this a little bigger. That session ID should not change. And it's also a lot quicker. So I'm hammering the F5 button. Well, notice this is not changing at all. So our code is properly saying, does the thing exist? And if it exists, we're just using it stock. We're not remaking it. So now we can actually create sessions. We can actually keep reusing this one over and over, but now we're making sessions. So we're actually getting there somewhere in the code. So we pop back over. Does anybody have any questions thus far, or any complaints or problems getting anything to run? I don't see anything in chat. There's no QA, I don't think. Nope. Okay. So we will just keep hammering along. There we go. Okay. So we've actually got most of the backend set up. There's only a little bit more we need to do, and most of that actually involves needing to get stuff into the client. So that's what we're going to move on to. We are going to move on to actually setting up the client side. So while looking at a room name and looking at that weird string of text is great, it's not a video call. And it's really hard to communicate through just random strings. So let's actually get some JavaScript running. Let's actually get a session going, seeing how all that works. So the way this actually works is when someone's going to visit the page, we'll do all the backend stuff, make sure that all works. Then the JavaScript's going to kick in. It's going to initialize a session in OpenTalk based on whatever session the backend decided to use. So our front-end code will actually be told which session to work with. It's then going to get access to your camera and microphone, because modern web browsers, they don't just give you access to that stuff. You actually either got to tell it which ones to use or things like that for various security reasons. Then it's going to actually connect to the OpenTalk system and set up the routing and start actually piping your media and stuff through the internet. And then we're going to start listening for other connections. That way, if someone else joins the system, we can get that all piped back in and start to work. So this is a little bit of a block of code. So I think, Tanya, if you have a link for where some of this template stuff is, you can pop that in there. Otherwise, I'm going to do some copying and pasting here because this is quite a bit of code. But essentially what we're going to do is we're going to use the Laravel layout system. So we're going to create an application layout, and this will inject itself automatically through Blade. Oops, I thought I had callouts on here. But what we're going to do is over that not showing. Oh, I'm on the wrong screen. There we go. We can see my mouse. Basically, what we're going to do is we're going to create a page that has 2 divs. One of those is going to be publisher. That's for us. And the other div is going to contain all of our subscribers. The way we kind of operate with the video API is you are either or both a publisher and a subscriber. So a publisher is someone who is publishing some sort of media back to the session. So in my case, if we pretend that Hop-In is an OpenTalk session, I am publishing to all of you my video, my audio, and my screen share. You all are acting as subscribers. You are subscribed to my screen share, my video, and my audio. You could decide that you don't want to be subscribed to my audio by, in theory, muting me. You could also be a publisher if you were to jump up on the stage. So when Caroline was on here, she was also publishing. But even though I was connected and I'm acting as a publisher, I am subscribed to her. So you can be both a publisher and a subscriber at exactly the same time. And depending on how complicated your application is, you can elect to only publish specific things. So you could do an audio-only video thing with just screen sharing and just talking, no camera. We're not going to get deep into those kind of woods. But suffice to say, you can select exactly what you want to be able to publish. We're just going to dump those into divs for right now. The other thing we're going to do is we're just going to pull down the OpenTalk JavaScript client directly from the CDN. If you want to, you can download an NPM package and run that through like Browserify or whatever to actually like generate like nice JavaScript files. We're going to just pull it straight into our file, our template, and then we're going to have a second script tag that actually contains all of our logic for the page. Instead of it just stops us from having to deal with like Browserifying in the middle of a demo. So you can totally set this up with like an actual JavaScript pipeline that compiles these things down, just a little bit above and beyond what we need to do today. The second part of this is going to be the actual JavaScript itself. So there are 2 links, I think. Yep, Tanya put a link to the actual Blade file itself. So you can, if you are following along, you can copy and paste that, and it's going to just save yourself a whole lot of headache. I will basically be doing the same thing here in a minute. But there's a couple sections here that we really need to think about. This, however, is most of the code you actually need, which is pretty surprising when you think about how complicated you can make some of these applications. This code will let you do a many-to-many video application straight out of the box without any additional work. It's roughly about like 30-ish lines of code, and you could cinch some of this up a little bit. But the main sections we're going to look at, we have an error handler at the top. It's just going to log the error. It's just there for if anything does go wrong. But like I said, there's a couple steps we work through when creating an OpenTalk session. Or like creating the client side. So we're going to take that session, and this is using the Blade template. So we're going to inject an API key into session ID. We'll go through adding that here in a little bit. But we're going to create that session object. And then we are going to create a publisher. So that at this point, we're starting to say we need access to the camera. Where are we going to put this thing? So we're going to use ot.init publisher. We're going to tell it it's going to go in the publisher div. So that way we can see ourselves. And then If there's multiples of these, we will insert mode. So for example, if you have multiple cameras, you could actually append multiple things to that. And we're just going to say fill up that space 100% by 100%. If anything blows up, pass it off to handle error, letting it console log. The next session of that is actually connecting to OpenTalk. So this is where we will need an authentication token. We will build that authentication token here in just a little bit. So we don't worry, you haven't missed anything. We actually I haven't shown you how to build those yet. But we're going to connect to OpenTalk using an authentication token. And then if that all works, we are going to publish whatever our publisher settings are. In this case, we're just grabbing a camera and a microphone. We're going to publish those out to OpenTalk. Then we are going to listen for anybody else who also publishes things. So whenever someone creates a stream by publishing a bit of media, we are going to take that event. We're going to dump them in the subscriber div and then append that to there. So we can actually have multiple people it'll just keep appending until we reach a limit of whatever it is. I can't remember what the number is off the top of my head. It's a fairly large amount of publishers. But that's it. With this, we publish ourselves, and then we can also subscribe to anybody else that works. So let's go ahead and I'm going to grab and copy and paste a bunch of this code. Yep, that's the correct one. Because while I'm sure everybody does enjoy me typing this stuff out, this is a lot of stuff. So we're going to go to resources, views. We're going to create a new file called room.blade.php. And we're going to paste that stuff in there. So again, I'm using the exact same code everybody else is using. Let me bring my other screen back up. That screen. There we go. Sorry, I'm rearranging. Sorry for the zoom in and out. I'm rearranging some windows. So again, we've got our publisher, we've got our subscriber, we've got some code that's just pasted in there that we took directly. So again, we're going to need to put some variables in here. So API key, session ID, token. That's our next step. But this should be everything we need for the client side to be able to actually work. So we need to pass that information back up to the client. So it's past that connection info. Basically, we're going to remove that dump and die statement, and we're going to return a new view. We're going to say, use that room template we just created, and we're going to pass in an array of data. So an API key, a session ID, and the token. So the API key, we've already got stored in the object, so we can just use this key. The session ID is stored in the room. Notice we don't use $session because $session may not exist. It only exists the first time we create a room, but it does exist all the time whenever we get a room object back. So we're going to use room session ID. And then to generate the token, we are going to use the generate token method off of the OpenTalk client. That can take a bunch of additional options as well. But we're just going to pass the session ID. It'll generate a connection ID, and then everything will work. By default, the way we're running this right now, everybody's a moderator. So like if you have like a UI, like everybody would be in a moderator UI. But for right now, we're just worried about like getting this stuff to work. You can extend the stuff as needed. So let's go ahead and pop back over to room controller. You're going to get rid of this. Turn a view called room. API key. Just name the key, didn't I? Key. And then session ID. And then token. So again, what we're doing is these three variables, API key, session ID, and token, these are going to be injected to API key, session ID, and token down here. So now when we actually view that page, that should actually render properly with the correct information. So we should now be able to check if this works. We come here, I should be able to refresh, and this should just automatically work I am in the same browser, so this all should be good. And there we can see. So I should be pretty in sync with whatever is happening on Hopin. But so that is my camera sitting right here on top of my monitor. And that's all working really, really well. Since it is just me, I am not subscribed to my own audio channel, which is good. Otherwise, we get probably a lot of feedback. But this is working straight out of the box. It did not ask me for permission because I've already granted permission on localhost. But the first time you do it, it should pop up and be like, what camera do you want to use? All that stuff. So that gets us that part. But then the question becomes, that's great, but how exactly do we get multiple people to actually use this? Because sitting in a room alone is basically what we've been doing for the last year and a half. We're tired of doing that. We want other people in the room. So for development stuff like this, and especially with video, there's a couple considerations we have to think about. One is that obviously for security reasons, we don't want to just send information across the bare wire. In fact, WebRTC, short of being on localhost, requires an SSL certificate for it to actually work. So you can't just open up a port like on your router and have people connect to it. You could, but you also need an SSL certificate in front of it. That's a lot of stuff to get set up. Even though I have like a little server set up and stuff at my home, I generally don't deal with that. There are ways to actually tunnel information back to your local PC for people to test. And for video, especially what I'll do is a lot of times is I will test with my my phone. So how do we get that to work? I usually recommend using an application called Local Tunnel. This is an NPM program that you can install globally on the command line. And it will open up a tunnel from the outside world to a port on your computer. So in this case, we will use Local Tunnel to open up a 443 connection over SSL to port 80 on my machine. If you're just running bare metal, it would be port 8000. But that way we get a very small, tight connection back to the computer. Installation is super simple. You just do npm install -g for global local tunnel. You could do it locally as well, but I don't tend to tie it to an application, so I just install it globally. And then we can run it by just calling npx local tunnel, and then what port we want to roll this back to. So in my case, port would be 80, might be 8000 for you, might be 8001, whatever. But that's how it'll work. There are other similar programs out there. One really popular one is ngrok. I tend to not use it as much anymore because I tend to work on a lot of different devices. ngrok requires me to be logged in on every single one of those. So it's just sometimes more of a hassle than anything. But what we should be able to do is, because everything is running locally, let's pop out of here real quick. I should be able to run npx local tunnel port 80, and we will get back a URL. There's one other thing that I think I need to do, because I noticed this doing it last night. There's a real quick change I need to make on here. I've noticed using local tunnel, and I don't think this is a local tunnel problem itself. But for whatever reason, it might be Sail. I don't know. It probably is Sail. If you're using local tunnel, you're going to want to set in your config/app.php, set the URL to whatever this is. Otherwise, it doesn't redirect right. It's kind of weird. I haven't noticed that before doing this demo. So, but what I should be able to do is paste in my URL, go to room. You're going to get a little pop up there. It's going to make me log in because I'm not logged in through this route. But we'll notice the authentication middleware and stuff kicked in, which is perfect. And it did not redirect me properly. Okay. So I'm going to just So it's going to look ugly going through the tunnel real quick. But if I come down here, I'm down there. If I pop up my telephone. Sorry, I'll rearrange these windows so I can see the URL. https:// Fluffy Baboon 10, that's not a 110 dot oak a dot lt/room. And it'll be just a second. I should pop here in a second. I have to log back in. At Vonage.com. Super secret password. Local tunnel is not the fastest thing in the world, but it works really well. So let me go switch back over to HTTPS. I should pop up. Oh, allow. Hey, there I am. Nope. I stopped talking to avoid feedback. Not because that muted or anything. You probably heard me pop up there real quick. Just trying to avoid any feedback situations because that would suck real bad. But that was coming from my phone directly through local IT, through a local tunnel. So as you start to play with this, working locally is great, but obviously for video applications, you probably need something else to test. So I would recommend using local tunnel. Again, I think that whole redirect thing is a problem with Sail more than anything because it's going through local tunnel, then it's going through a load balancer to stuff, and so something is getting lost in translation. So for the rest of this, I'm going to go back to localhost room, but that is actually like, again, if anybody else had signed up and registered during that time, you could. And let me turn this off so you don't see multiples of me flailing around. You could have multiple people and they just stack on top of each other. So technically out of the box, we have already created a many-to-many video application just with a hard-coded room. So let's go back to the slides. So again, local tunnel, you can also use ngrok. There's a whole host of them out of there now as people are doing development where they need to actually get outside access. So use whatever flavor you want. I just tend to like a local tunnel. And we're kind of nearing the end of the stretch. So one of the things we wanted to be able to let people do was create their own rooms. We don't want everybody to just have to be shoved into the same room. So let's let them actually create their own rooms. This is pretty easy, and this is more of a Laravel type thing than anything. Because again, technically, we're going to create these rooms on demand. We're going to automatically inject those tokens up. So a lot of that stuff's been done. And getting this to work is actually pretty simple. We're just going to fix our route here real quick. So let's go back to web. We're going to add a new parameter onto it called name. So now what will happen is our route will go from just /room to /room/something. And then for our controller, and I'm just going to skip ahead a couple slides while we do this, we can say for join room, we're now going to just take a name. Laravel understands how to take that parameter and pass it to the controller and the controller method. So all you have to do is say, as long as the parameter name matches as long as our route parameter name matches the method parameter name, Laravel figures it all out. And then instead of hard coding demo name, we can just switch that to name, and we'll switch this one to name. So now we actually should be able to update everything. I think I did all of that. We added the parameter, we changed it there, we changed it there. So now, if I refresh right now, I should get a 404, which is correct because /room by itself no longer exists. No, we don't need to log in. But if I come here to, and to prove that this actually does work, I'm just going to mash keys. It still says demo room. I didn't change the name. Let's fix that while we're at it. In theory, we should be worried about cross-site injection and all that. This is a demo though, so we're gonna skew that part. We're going to come up to here. We're going to change this to name. And if I refresh this, we should get whatever random junk I throw up in there. So we'll randomly create some room names in here. So this is now creating these things on demand. If I hop back over to, turn the tunnel back off, we go back into MySQL, and we go back to the database. Not pretty to look at, but we can definitely tell we have 4 rows now created. So every time we just randomly threw a name at it, it randomly created one for us. If we want to reuse one, so if I want to come back to here, I'll grab that one, paste it back in. Notice again, that one comes up pretty quick. Should still have 4. Yep. All of that backend code we did to store these things off and save them, working like a charm. So now you can have logged in users, hit routes, dynamically create rooms, and work off from there. We have a couple minutes, so let's do one final thing. Video is great, but there's a lot of stuff that happens in the back end. One of those things is signaling. You can actually send small textual events back and forth through the system. Some people will use these for some very rudimentary chat systems. What we're going to use for it to hear right now is we can actually alert and say like, hey, so-and-so has entered the room. The signaling stuff's all built into the API, the SDKs. There's really not a whole lot we need to do. It is very, very specific in what it does, though. So you can send a signal to an entire session or to a specific connection in a session. Here, we're just going to broadcast it to every single person in the session. So we're going to say this OpenTalk signal, and we're going to pass it the session ID. And then it takes an array that only has 2 keys, type, which is the type of event that's happening, and these are custom. You can do whatever you want. So user join does not exist anywhere in the OpenTalk system. It's specific to my application. And then data, which needs to be a string. This is usually something that catches people up a lot of times. The SDK does not automatically convert like a JSON object to a string, and the system will not accept just JSON. You have to send an actual string because it's really meant for control type things. You're never going to use this for passing files around. You're never going to use this for passing like binary data like pictures around. It really is meant to be a small little control text channel. It's useful for chat, but there is a payload size. I don't remember what it is, but it's not very big. And again, the data portion only has to be a string, which is why we're JSON encoding the username, which means we'll need to parse it on the other end. So let's throw that into our room controller. We'll do that right after we create the room. So this OpenTalk signal. Let's give it the room session ID, type, user join, data, JSON encode, username. And we're going to use another part of the Laravel system. We're going to use the auth facade that actually pulls in the currently existing user. So we're going to say, give me the user that's currently logged in and give me their name. And that should be it. So basically, we're just going to pass that username back through the signaling system. We can then watch for that. So if we hop back over to the slides, we can add a small little bit of JavaScript to listen for those signals. And then if those signals exist, we're going to parse out that object. Because again, it's just technically a string, but we can turn JSON into strings and back and forth pretty easily. So we're going to parse that event data back out. We're going to create a div. We're going to throw that in another div. And it's basically going to say, so-and-so has joined. So let's go ahead and add that. That's going to go back in our JavaScript. So session dot on signal event if event.type is a signal user join. You will notice I said it was user join in our code. It will prepend the word signal to the text, the actual one that's sent through. The reason for that is the channel is used for a lot of different things. Signal : is used to denote that this is actually a signal. So the system automatically puts it on there. So if we have a user joining, we're going to get a payload of JSON parse event data, event div element. We're going to create a new div, and then event div inner HTML equals payload username. I probably could use literals, but I didn't. And then we're going to document.get element by ID. Events, we'll create this events div here in just a second. So we're going to append in there our new event div. There we go. So when that event comes in, we're going to create a new div for it, shove it into what we'll make look like a chat box. We're going to go back up. We are going to create a little grid using the Tailwind. We're going to put the videos to one side, put what looks like a little chat box on the other. So let's do some Tailwind now. We're going to do a new div, which is a grid. Calls 4 columns wide with a gap of 4 and a padding of 4. And then in there, we're going to do a group. One of the divs is going to span 3. That's all I need in there. This wider div will house our publisher and everything. And then the last of those divs, we're going to call events. Give it a white background, make it rounded. So this will be the events div that we reference when we call this right here. I believe that should be it. So we come back to here. I'm going to refresh this. So now it might be a little bit hard to see, but now we have this white section over here. If I copy this, paste this in here, what we should see, because I'm already logged in. Yep. So because I'm still logged into the same account, it's going to say Chris has joined. And if I refresh this a couple times, it's going to join there. We could do things like listen for the destruction method and say someone has left, do all that kind of stuff. We could wire this up with a form to send signals and stuff back and forth. But that's the signaling system kind of in a nutshell. So that kind of gives you like a holistic view of everything that the video API can do at a very basic level. Again, from here, it's kind of more just about thinking about what you want to build. So a couple things we didn't deal with were moderation tools. You can create tokens that have various permissions. So we didn't. So I think they default to moderator. But you can specifically say this person's token is a moderator token. This other person's token is, I can't remember all the roles. I think there's 3 or 4 roles. Specifically set those kind of things up. You can set time limits on all those things. But you can actually build in some moderation tools on top of what is already in the OpenTalk system. The JavaScript and the native clients are very, very feature rich. I barely scratched the surface of what they can do. So definitely dig into those, see what other stuff's in there. There's some UI elements for automatic layouts. We built our layout by hand here, but you can have it automatically create and use some default style sheets and stuff to just automatically lay stuff out on the screen. There's archiving, which we didn't touch at all. So you can put in entire archive setups for things. You can control what you do and don't want to publish. So again, we just use the default of give me a camera, give me a microphone. You can check for screen sharing publishing. Again, you can decide I only want audio to come through if you kind of want like a clubhousey kind of thing. But there's a whole bunch of stuff you can do from here. And again, the code, if you go back through and look at it, this will work for one-to-one or one-to-many. The only difference is we would just put some stuff in Laravel to say like, nope, I've already got 2 people in the room, stop. But otherwise, you can just keep getting people stacked onto there. And obviously, you could do some better things and just keep appending them, like clean some stuff up. So basically, you kind of just need to think about what do you want to accomplish with your video application, and then kind of just morph this into exactly what you want. Like I said, because it's on Laravel and we've got some of those bits in there, you can scale this up to a much closer MVP for whatever you're looking for. A couple resources to think about. For our API documentation, you can go to talkbox.com/developer. That has all of the API documentation for the SDKs themselves per language. So you can go to the PHP SDK, see everything that it does. Because again, we didn't touch everything today. But you can see everything that it does. You can see what the actual REST API itself looks like. And then whatever those client SDKs that you want to use can do. And then obviously there's the general OpenTalk tutorials if you want to get a real quick fix on how to actually get stuff set up. So a large part of the second half of this for where we did the client side stuff, that's taken directly from the web tutorial. So you can expand on that. We have a ton of blog and tutorials at learn.vonage.com, not just on this, but a bunch of our other APIs as well. So if you ever want to see how to do things in a little bit more real world light, you can go there, play around on learn.vonage.com. And I've got some links for Local Tunnel, the Laravel docs, and then, of course, our package on Packagist. So with that, I think we are at roughly about 2 hours straight. That's all I've got.